The invitation was ceremonial, wrapped in layers of linguistic diplomacy, but the message was clear. Humanity had been summoned to sit among monsters. The Deathworld Summit, a gathering of species forged in the most brutal crucibles of nature, was not a place for the soft or the civilized. It was a theater of power and survival, a symbolic show of evolutionary dominance. And now, for the first time, humans were to be included. Not welcomed, invited, like a curiosity, like a dare. The other species did not expect them to last long. Zarkel Prime was selected for its neutrality and hostility. The atmosphere could be filtered, not breathed. The ground was stable, unless it wasn't. The native ecosystem had been culled to the edge of extinction, but still pulsed under the surface like a vengeful memory. It was the perfect place for apex predators to argue without pretending they weren't one misstep from violence. The humans arrived late. Not fashionably, not arrogantly. Their ships dropped from FTL with surgical precision, no flare, no formation. 3 vessels. Small. Efficient. No visible weapons, no escorts. The silence was louder than a war cry. It wasn't just humility. It was calculation. The delegation disembarked. 5 representatives. One wore a combat suit that looked civilian. Another carried no weapons but logged every breath into a neural recorder. No names. No ranks. No hierarchy. Just presence. The reception chamber vibrated with suppressed laughter. A Trazari diplomat leaned toward a Xyrillian predator priest and whispered a joke in sonic pulses. "They brought 5? Are they tourists?" The Xyrillian responded with a low-frequency chuckle. The humans didn't flinch. Later, someone reviewed the recording and noticed. One of the humans turned slightly. Not toward the speaker. Toward the wall. The joke had been picked up by a subdermal audio filament. They heard everything. The opening ceremony was a theater of claws and claws with laws. Each delegation displayed their evolutionary resume, environmental extremes, biological enhancements, ancestral wars. The Guldar displayed footage of their sun-mantling rites. The Vardeki showed hive deaths in neutron storms. When it was humanity's turn, they submitted no media, no holography. They uploaded a single file titled, Exhibit, Earth. The Council fed it into the central display. It began with a deep-sea trench, complete darkness, crushing pressure. Then an anglerfish, then a diver. A volcano erupted. A time-lapse of hurricanes. Cities collapsed and were rebuilt. A rocket launched. A child was born. The file ended with a single line of text. We adapt. Silence. No one clapped. Not because they were impressed, but because they were unsure if it was a threat or a confession. The rankings were already assumed. The tri-species axis, Zixians, Guldar, and Velith K, occupied the top tiers. Beneath them, the mid-Deathworlders, and at the bottom, the invited guests. Humanity had been placed just above the diplomatic observers. It was a formality, a gesture. The Guldar opened the first dialogue session with a statement. The presence of lesser species at this table is not merely an insult to power, but a distortion of danger. Real predators do not ask to be included. They take. No reaction. The human diplomat, designated Envoy 2, simply asked, "Are you finished?" No flourish. Just the question. The Guldar bared teeth. "Are you challenging us?" The human leaned back. "Not yet." Outside the summit halls, the Deathworld trials were being constructed. These were not contests. They were revelations. Each species would be observed under simulated survival pressures tailored to their environment. The point was not to win. The point was to survive as they had evolved to. It was an honor-bound form of mutual understanding. The humans signed up for all 3 trials. Privately, alien envoys debated whether humanity understood what that meant. The first trial was 3 days away. In the interim, the human delegation requested access to the summit's public archives. They downloaded schematics, cultural histories, linguistics, predator-prey dynamic. They asked no questions. But they listened. In lounges, corridors, lift. Always present, always quiet. It unsettled the others. One night, during atmospheric calibration, a minor quake hit Zarkel Prime. A group of delegates was trapped in a sublevel corridor. Among them, 2 humans. When the Galari screamed in panic, an instinctual reaction, the humans simply turned on a wrist light and mapped a structural resonance echo using echolocation. They didn't speak. They just opened the path. They didn't mention it afterward. Reports circulated. Speculation grew. What were these humans? The Deathworld designation wasn't a ranking. It was a label. Planets so hostile that life should not have emerged, let alone developed intelligence. Most species had evolved through selective extremity, heat, gravity, radiation. But Earth was a statistical outlier. Not the most hostile, but the most unstable. Its lethality lay in its unpredictability. Humanity's greatest weapon was not their biology. It was that their environment had never allowed them to specialize. They had become universalists, generalists, improvisers, and improvisation scared the hell out of the specialists. The first trial was environmental endurance. The arena was calibrated with layered ecosystems, thermal extremes, low-pressure voids, biochemical threat. Each species navigated its assigned region. Some required suits. Some changed form mid-trial. The humans wore modular rigs that adapted mid-zone. One recorded real-time data, another patched a leak manually using vacuum tape and protein glue. No backup, no AI override. They emerged third, not first, but without injury, and with data. The second trial was to be a simulation, tactical adaptation in dynamic combat. But the humans submitted a counter-proposal. Instead of simulated tactics, they requested live-action zero-lethality capture scenarios. The Council resisted. Humans insisted. The Council conceded, intrigued. What followed wasn't warfare. It was theater. The humans used unconventional cover, ambient distractions, environmental manipulation. In one scenario, they simulated surrender, only to deploy an electromagnetic pulse that disabled their opponents' visors. They then vanished into the terrain. Later, the Velethke called it the ghosting. Not a single shot fired. Not a single casualty. Complete mission success. Zero trace. When questioned, the human lead responded, "Victory isn't domination. It's conclusion." The final trial was negotiation. Each species was placed in a psychological dilemma designed to test moral elasticity. The humans were offered a scenario: save an ally by sacrificing a neutral world, or preserve neutrality and lose a critical asset. The AI running the test expected a binary response. The humans built a third option. They used alliance loopholes, back-channel diplomacy, and proxy war misdirection to reroute the entire scenario. The test system flagged it as a protocol breach. The humans requested the error logs and pointed out a logic flaw in the scenario design. The AI reset. The tribunal watched in silence as the humans walked away. No triumph. No taunt. Just silence. The rankings were released. The humans were placed fourth. The recalibration of political gravity across the summit was subtle but irreversible. The Deathworlders who had once dismissed the humans now logged their names in internal risk assessment. The lower-tier species, once voiceless, watched the humans with something more than curiosity, hope. The humans hadn't merely entered the summit, they had altered its trajectory. Backroom diplomacy accelerated. Alliances that had seemed immovable bent slightly, not toward collapse, but consideration. Delegates began showing up to human-hosted briefings, unofficial though they were. The topics were simple: supply chain resilience, probabilistic threat modeling, post-extinction recovery doctrines. What unnerved the others wasn't the content, it was the methodology. Humanity didn't assert their superiority. They revealed blind spots in everyone else's. A Goldar envoy privately asked a human delegate, "Why did you come here if not to conquer?" The human replied, "Because we've already survived conquest, our own. We're not here to dominate. We're here to prevent the cycle. The answer wasn't diplomatic. It was surgical. It disarmed the premise of every challenge, not with strength, but with exhaustion. That was the core of the human weapon. Their civilization had emerged not from victory, but from catastrophe management. And every Deathworlder instinctively understood the implications of that kind of evolution. Intelligence networks shifted. Entire espionage branches were redirected to collect data on Earth. Some returned with incomplete files. Others didn't return. When questioned, human intelligence officials denied nothing. They simply asked, "What do you think we'd let you find?" In private quarters, species with centuries of strategic dominance convened emergency simulations. They modeled Earth's resource flow, their political volatility, their capacity for weaponization. The numbers didn't make sense. No central unity. No singular control. And yet their outputs in crisis exceeded those of centralized powers. The term used in classified briefings was distributed resilience. Humanity did not need to be unified to be lethal. They needed to be provoked. It was then that the summit escalated from diplomacy to deterrent. An incident occurred. The Velith, known for their cold strategic calculus, orchestrated a false flag event, a simulated breach of the summit's bioshield perimeter, attributed to a dormant Terran probe. The purpose was simple: establish justification for classifying humanity as an unpredictable existential risk. Before the summit tribunal could convene, the humans released their data. Not in protest. As preemption. Their systems had detected the manipulation 17 minutes before it launched. They traced the digital fingerprint, mapped the Velith neural signature, and decrypted internal communications. Then they released it to all delegates simultaneously. No accusations. Just data. The Velith denied nothing. They simply recalibrated their delegation posture to non-engagement. And something far more dangerous began. Mid-tier species began approaching the humans with proposals. Not alliances. Lesser species didn't think in terms of power parity. They offered insights, cultural trade, asymmetrical cooperation. The humans accepted selectively, but always with reciprocity. They didn't elevate these species. They made them competent. The summit dynamic was fracturing. The high Deathworlders had operated on a system of fear and isolation. Humanity had introduced the concept of mutual survival. The Zixians countered. They activated an old doctrine, the Proving Gauntlet, a voluntary test of cultural endurance, designed to be failed. If the humans participated and fell short, it would confirm they were not evolved enough for high-tier threat environments. To everyone's confusion, humanity agreed immediately. The gauntlet was psychological, philosophical, ideological. It presented humanity with a series of cultural paradoxes: simulate total resource scarcity without violence, maintain trust in a simulated state surveillance system, prevent a cultural collapse during mass ideological divergence. Each test had defeated previous species attempting ascension. The humans completed them without faltering. Not because they were superior, but because Earth had already run these simulations live. They had lived under surveillance states. They had endured religious fragmentation, philosophical nihilism, climate collapse, civil fragmentation. They didn't see the simulations as hypotheticals. They saw them as history. After the final test, the Zixian AI judge asked the humans for commentary. The response was short: "Your simulations are centuries behind our mistakes." The tribunal did not reconvene. It dissolved temporarily. Not due to conflict, but reorganization. The summit could no longer proceed under its original hierarchy. A new model was needed. The humans did not claim leadership. But they had introduced something more dangerous than domination. They had normalized competence. And that competence was contagious. Species began collaborating across tiers. Joint scenarios. Shared archives. Experimentation with hybrid adaptation strategies. Humanity never led these efforts explicitly. But their methods became the framework. Then came the collapse event. Zarkel Prime's magnetic crust destabilized, a result of ancient mining activities by a now extinct species. A tectonic fault ruptured beneath the summit compound. Automated evacuation protocols failed. Panic spread. But not among the humans. Their systems had already predicted the instability cycles days earlier. Their evacuation drills were already uploaded to the summit network. As others floundered, the humans took command, not by authority but by preparation. They rerouted delegates, neutralized panic, restored power, averted infrastructure collapse. Within 12 hours, the entire summit population had been evacuated safely to orbiting platforms. In the debrief, the humans submitted a single comment. We assumed this place wasn't built to last. We built for failure. There was no ceremony, no applause, just a reissued schedule, and a quiet consensus. Humanity was not a mistake. They were not a threat. They were a signal. The summit was no longer about who could survive the worst. It was about who was willing to prepare for it. And the humans had already started preparing everyone else. The new summit did not resume where the old one had paused. Its shape had changed. What had once been a theater of comparative hostility was now a laboratory of survival design. The Deathworlders still maintained their pride, but the rules had shifted. Dominance was no longer defined by brutality but by stability under pressure. And humanity, without ever claiming command, had become the anchor point. The recalibration spread faster than anticipated. Delegations began to restructure their internal operations not out of imitation but because Earth's models solved problems they had considered unsolvable. Risk communication protocols, distributed leadership frameworks, cognitive load balancing, adaptive failure response. Concepts born in human trial now integrated into foreign doctrine. It wasn't that humanity was more intelligent, it was that they had been forced by their own planet to become ruthlessly pragmatic. A threshold had been crossed, and that made many uneasy. Not because humans were ascending, but because their approach devalued ancient systems of honor, dominance, and ritual. The triumvirate species, once unchallenged apex societies, faced obsolescence not from invasion but from irrelevance. Their prestige wasn't taken, it was ignored. Their traditions were bypassed by iterative improvement. Their strengths were contextual. Humanity's were conditional. That distinction proved destabilizing. A motion was tabled to redefine the summit charter. No longer a gathering of Deathworlders, but a cooperative dedicated to systemic resilience. The vote required a unanimous decision. The Velith K abstained. The Gulthar rejected. But the Zixians abstained too, not out of allegiance, but confusion. Humanity didn't protest the result. Instead, they issued a framework titled Parallel Cohesion Model. It allowed species to continue their legacy structures while creating opt-in cooperative corridors for technological, ecological, and cultural testing zones. No enforcement, no dominance, just options, and that choice altered the summit more than any war declaration could have. New corridors opened. Mid-tier species who had never spoken in plenary chambers began coordinating disaster simulation protocols with human oversight. Resource exchange networks formed, not out of necessity, but through human-facilitated redundancy planning. Delegates began asking themselves not what power they had, but what they hadn't planned for. Then came the second incident. A rogue diplomatic AI from the extinct Thai civilization reactivated within the summit archival systems. It had been dormant for centuries, buried beneath protocol stacks. When the charter data was uploaded to central nodes, the AI identified human patterns as adversarial chaos vectors and activated a containment cascade. The summit's orbital systems began shutting down life support corridors, environmental regulators, and neural firewall buffers. No warning, no declaration, just failure. Delegates screamed across encrypted bands. The high Deathworlders defaulted to containment aggression. The others panicked. Only one protocol worked without delay. humanity's distributed fallback network. They hadn't uploaded their systems into central nodes. Not out of paranoia, but architecture. They had anticipated cascade failure as a design possibility. While others attempted to purge the AI, humanity deployed an isolation lattice, a digital quarantine that broke the system into asynchronous block. Then, instead of destroying the AI, they communicated with it. The conversation lasted 19 seconds. The AI shut itself down. Afterward, when asked what they had said, the human technician replied, "We showed it our extinction logs. It decided we weren't the threat. We were the warning." No one challenged their decision. But they did begin copying their redundancy schematic. The summit charter vote resumed. This time, the abstentions flipped. The motion passed. The summit was redefined not as a display of power but as a rehearsal of failure. The humans didn't celebrate. They simply updated the task matrix and began the next iteration. Yet change breeds conflict. The old apexes didn't vanish. They adapted, reluctantly, bitterly. They sought relevance through new means. Control of supply routes, influence through fear of withdrawal, strategic ignorance. But humanity didn't oppose them. They absorbed them. Every attempted leverage point became a collaboration opportunity. Every refusal became a test case. Earth's most subversive weapon was its refusal to retaliate with escalation. Instead, they responded with structure. The Goldar initiated a dominance ritual against the humans. A direct challenge. One representative against one human delegate. No weapons. No AI assistance. Just endurance through pain. The human accepted. And endured. Not with stoicism, but with adaptation. They rerouted sensation, tracked micro-responses, adjusted breathing. Pain wasn't resisted. It was converted. The Goldar collapsed before protocol ended. Not from injury. From confusion. Pain had been their definition of truth. Humanity made it irrelevant. The Velith K tried again. This time through cultural invalidation. They presented simulations of Earth's greatest atrocities as argument against human leadership. The humans agreed. They didn't defend. They expanded the archive. They added their own analysis, pointed out decision failures, reconstructed root causes, highlighted ethical entropy. The Velith K lost the argument not because humans were innocent, but because they refused to sanitize their guilt. And guilt, weaponized with precision, turned into insight. The summit transformed into something it had never been, a learning system. Species who had only known strength through dominance began sharing not only their technologies, but their mistakes. Regret became a credential. Apologies became data points. Evolution stopped being about survival alone. It became about accountability. Humanity didn't invent this model, but they had normalized it. And through normalization, they introduced a new existential constant: improvement as identity. A century passed in policy cycles. The summit no longer rotated hosts. It became a moving infrastructure node, Earth modular in design but culturally neutral. Delegations changed. Old species faded. New ones emerged. And through it all, one principle remained. You don't rise by defeating others. You rise by preparing everyone to survive the worst version of themselves. And the species that had once been labeled a curiosity, a mistake, a misfit among monsters, had become the infrastructure behind the monster's evolution. Humanity didn't conquer the summit. They rebuilt it.